Okay, so you know that feeling right when you're putting in like the maximum effort, but you're just not seeing those results, those big results that you really want.
Yeah, it's like you're on a hamster wheel just going and going.
Totally.
And that's where this idea, this 80-20 principle really comes in.
And that's what we're diving into today, right? This whole idea of working smarter, not harder.
Exactly.
And we're going deep on this one. We've got excerpts from the book. We're going to really unpack this whole thing.
Yeah, and what's so interesting about this principle is that it's rooted in economics, but it really applies to pretty much every part of life, like business strategy or even personal happiness.
Right. So it's like almost like a life hack in a way, but
Mm.
it's backed by all this research, and it's really about being more effective with your time and your energy. And the book is packed with real world examples too. So we're going to get into all that.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that's most fascinating to me is that this idea has been around for a while. I mean, the book
Mm.
talks about how IBM actually used the 80-20 principle back in the 60s.
Wait, really? Back in the 60s?
Yeah, like way back when they were using it to optimize their software.
Wow, that's kind of wild when you think about it. Like something this counterintuitive was behind all that tech even back then.
It's true. And, it just shows that this isn't some new fad. It's a principle that's been proven to work across different industries and over time.
That's a really good point. So they were basically saying that back then, 80% of their computer processing time was being used by only 20% of the code.
Yeah, and that's a really simplified way to put it, but it gets at the heart of the principle.
So it's like they were just letting all this code just sit there, just eating up processing power for no reason.
Well, it wasn't that they didn't know about it, but it was more about recognizing that imbalance and then figuring out how to prioritize what mattered most.
Okay, that makes sense. So what do they do? Did they just scrap the other 80% of the code?
Not necessarily, but they use that knowledge to really zero in on that crucial 20% of code and make it as efficient as possible.
So it's like finding those rock star employees, right?
Hmm.
The ones who just get twice as much done in the same amount of time.
Exactly. And it's not that everyone else is bad. It's just that some people are really good at honing in on those high impact tasks.
Okay, so then how do you actually apply that to like a whole company? The book talks about that too, right? Like how to structure a business around this 80-20 idea.
Yeah, and that's where it gets really interesting because it challenges a lot of the traditional ways of thinking about business.
Okay, so spill the tea. What are we talking about here?
Well, for example, a lot of businesses focus on things like diversification,
Yeah.
trying to have their hands in a lot of different pots.
Right, spread the risk and all that.
Exactly. But the 80-20 principle suggests that real leverage often comes from identifying your strengths, your core competencies, and then really doubling down on those.
So it's almost like counterintuitive. Like instead of trying to be good at everything you're saying, be amazing at a few things.
Exactly, because those few things are likely what's driving the majority of your results anyway.
So, okay, let's get practical here.
Ah.
How does a business actually put this 80-20 thing into action? It seems like it could get pretty overwhelming, especially for a big company.
Yeah, it definitely can be a lot to wrap your head around, but the book does a really good job of like breaking it down into a manageable process.
Okay, good, because I was going to say,
Yeah, so they call it the 80-20 triad, and it's basically a three-step system.
a triad. I like it sounds kind of official.
Right, it's like identifying, exploiting, and then controlling.
Exploiting, that sounds a little intense.
Well, I mean it in the sense of like really maximizing, leveraging.
Okay, I get you. So you got to figure out what to focus on before you can actually start working smarter.
Exactly. It all starts with identification, like figuring out which parts of the business are actually driving the majority of the profits.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Data-driven decisions, right?
Exactly. It's not just about gut feeling, it's about really digging into the numbers and seeing what's really going on.
So like what kind of numbers are we talking about here?
Well, the book is a really interesting example of this electronics company,
Okay.
and they found that only a handful of their product groups, like a tiny percentage, were actually generating over half their profits.
Wait, seriously? More than half their profits from just a small fraction of what they were selling.
Yeah, it was something like that. It was wild.
That's huge. So what do you even do with that information? Do you just scrap everything else and just go all in on those top performers?
It's not always about completely abandoning the less profitable areas, but it definitely makes you think about resource allocation, right?
Right.
Like maybe you raise prices on those products, or you streamline production, or you just spend less management time on them, you know?
So it's about being strategic and making sure your efforts are aligned with where the actual value is.
Exactly. And that same principle applies to customers, too.
Oh yeah, for sure. You're not just selling products, you're building relationships.
Exactly. And some customers might seem really important on the surface, but they might actually be draining resources without generating a proportionate amount of profit.
It's like that old saying, show me the money.
Right. It's about focusing on the relationships that are mutually beneficial, both for the business and for the customer.
Okay, so we've talked about business, but how does this 80-20 thing work when it comes to like personal happiness and fulfillment?
Right, because that's the other side of the coin, isn't it?
Totally. It's like, what's the point of all this efficiency if you're not actually enjoying your life?
Exactly. And that's where the 80-20 principle gets really interesting, I think.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So think about it this way. How often do you find yourself bogged down by those never-ending to-do lists?
Oh my gosh, all the time.
Right, feeling like you're constantly chasing your tail, never quite catching up.
It's like the list never gets shorter no matter how much I check off.
Exactly. And the 80-20 principle encourages us to kind of step back from that approach and ask ourselves, what if true happiness and fulfillment actually come from a much smaller percentage of our activities?
Okay, so you're saying ditch the to-do list and just focus on like the fun stuff.
Well, it's not quite that simple, but it's about identifying those activities, those happiness islands, as the book calls them, that really light us up.
Happiness islands. I love that. It's like those moments where you're totally in the zone, completely engaged and energized by what you're doing.
Exactly. And the book argues that we should be spending more time on those islands.
Okay, but real life, right?
Yeah.
It's not like we could just chase those peaks of joy all the time.
Of course not. But it's about finding ways to incorporate more of those activities into our lives, even in small ways.
So it's about being intentional with our time and making choices that are aligned with what truly matters to us.
Precisely. And that's where this idea of a time revolution comes in.
A time revolution. Okay, now you're talking my language. Tell me more.
Well, the book challenges a lot of those traditional time management techniques, the ones that tell you to plan every minute of your day.
Yeah, like those color-coded calendars and stuff.
Exactly. And it argues that those techniques can actually make us less happy and less productive in the long run.
Yeah, okay, hold on. You're saying ditch the schedule?
Well, not completely, but it's about finding a more balanced approach.
So how does this time revolution actually work? I mean, what does it look like in practice?
Well, it starts with really understanding your own personal 80-20 when it comes to time,
Yeah.
Like, when do you feel most alive, most engaged, most fulfilled? Those are your happiness islands.
Right, those moments where time just flies by because you're so into what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
But then whose? How do you actually make those moments happen more often without, like, quitting my job or becoming a monk or something?
Yeah, it's not about becoming a recluse or anything. It's more about being intentional about how you structure your life and your work.
Well, so like, how do you actually do that?
Well, for one thing, it might mean saying no to more things. Those commitments that drain your energy and don't really bring you joy.
Okay, so boundaries are important.
Exactly. And it also might mean finding ways to incorporate more of those happiness islands into your existing work.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where you're both productive and fulfilled.
Exactly. And the book even takes this a step further, talking about harnessing the power of your subconscious mind.
Okay, now we're getting really out there.
Well, not really. I mean, think about it. Your subconscious mind is always working, even when you're not consciously aware of it.
That's true. I guess I never thought about it like that.
And the book argues that you can actually tap into that power to achieve your goals.
Okay, I'm listening. How do you do that?
Well, it starts with getting really clear about what you want. Like, what's your big, hairy, audacious goal?
Okay, so you're giving your subconscious a target.
Exactly. And then you need to consistently feed that goal to your subconscious, whether it's through affirmations, visualization, or even just writing it down and reviewing it regularly.
So it's about repetition and really drilling that goal into your mind.
Right. And then the final step, and this is crucial, is being open to receiving the answer.
Okay, what does that even mean?
It means trusting the process, even if it unfolds in unexpected ways.
So don't try to force it.
Exactly. Let go of the need to control every little detail and trust that your subconscious mind is working on it even when you're not consciously aware of it.
Okay, I can get behind that.
Yeah.
So basically, we're talking about working smarter, not harder, in every aspect of our lives.
Exactly. It's about identifying those key leverage points, whether it's in business time management or even our own minds, and using them to unlock exponential results.
So if there's one thing I want our listeners to take away from this deep dive, it's this: don't be afraid to question the status quo. Don't be afraid to experiment and find what works for you. And above all else, focus on that crucial 20% that really makes a difference. It might just change your life.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
This has been The Deep Dive. Go out there and find your 20%.